Once again I've enjoyed a few beers, and whilst perusing Reddit and reading TFDS awesomeness, I felt drawn to regale y'all with another tale from my past. For a few years I worked for a large telecom company in the US who delivered IPTV, internet, and voice over their circuits. It was my bridge from retail to the real IT work I do today, and while I detested climbing poles, attics, and crawling under houses, I rather enjoyed the work. I have the innate skill of following the wire. As with any wired circuit with an issue, no matter what tools you have at your disposal, the real work was chasing it down and knowing where to look and what to look for. I wasn't the top technician by numbers, but I was the guy managers would call out to deal with escalations. This job was one of those. A guy who'd had our service for a few years once again had intermittent issues. My favorite. Unless it went out of service, OOS, while I was there was very little I could do besides inspect and test every segment of the wire path I had access to. I told my manager as much. He said to just do the best I could. Fine, whatever, hopefully waving my magic wand works today. I call ahead, do my usual remote tests, of course everything looks perfect right now. Drive down, knock on the door, introduce myself. Tell him my manager sent me out specifically to deal with this problem. The guy laughed. Let me show you how many of y'all have been sent here to do precisely that. He opens a composition book and shows me a list of technician names, IDs, dates, and times. You mind signing in? I honestly laughed in absurdity. Shaking my head, I write my own name, ID, today's date, and the time on my watch. When I'm done I count, and there were 32 other names above mine, dating back over the last 4 years. Sir, unless I'm mistaken, you've had issues with our service ever since you've had it installed. Why the hell are you still with us? Well, I love the service when it works, which is most of the time. I'll never go back to cable. When it doesn't, it is annoying, of course. Something is wrong somewhere, and I figure if I keep calling enough, eventually someone will figure it out and fix it. My company was never going to recoup the money they've spent trying to fix this customer's service, even if he was subscribed without another call for the next 15 years. Nevertheless, I liked the challenge, so I decided to do my thing. What I found was the most immaculate install I had ever seen. A shielded Cat5e cable was bonded in the customer's network interface device, NID, and run to their modem. All of their TV receivers were connected with perfectly crimped shielded Ethernet cable, as were their desktop PCs. They only had one telephone, a multi-handset cordless base, which was plugged directly into the modem, bypassing any house wiring. Okay, in this case, as they had a wireless alarm system that didn't even require a landline phone connection, a new thing back in those days. A beautiful buried shielded drop wire running from their NID to the pedestal in the alley, properly bonded at both ends. The pedestal was also new, with shiny terminals and new splices to the underground cable. I tested everything anyway. It all came back perfect? Well, shit. All I could do was wait for it to screw up. I texted my manager and asked how much time I could have, because it was a perfect install and there was absolutely nothing I could correct. He told me I had the rest of the day. It was 3 p.m., that meant I would be expected to stay until midnight, or until the customer told me to leave. I relayed this to the customer. He laughed and said, you can sleep on the couch if you want, if this means my shit gets fixed. Shit. Luckily for me, I only had to wait about 3 hours until their service showed a disruption. I snapped to run a loop test, basically a frequency domain reflective, FDR, type test, originating from our equipment. I had run the same test before to determine the electrical length of their loop, also to look for bad connections along the way. It was perfectly flat all the way to their house. I ran it again, and found what showed up as a bridge tap roughly 400 feet away from their house. Bingo. Intermittent located. Downside was, it was in the cable in the ground somewhere, and per the union contract that meant no touchy for me. I called my manager. No answer. It was after 6. Called the on-duty manager. There aren't any cable techs working this late. You'd have to put in a ticket for tomorrow. Of course tomorrow it'll be fine, I won't be able to convince the tech to measure and locate what I captured, and the job will get closed out, no trouble found, which is a death sentence for us techs who dared to call them out in the first place. Well, fuck that, I'm going to find it myself. I tell the customer what I learned, and that I was going to walk down the cable line and see if I can locate the trouble spot. "Hey, I have one of those rolling wheels that measures distance, would that help you?" Fuck yeah it would. I didn't have access, though I did get it later, to the program that showed cable maps, but I knew roughly where the cable went, and it's easy enough to put a tone generator on the cable and trace it manually. He went to dig it out of his garage, while I drove to the other end of the cable to disconnect it from the access multiplexer. I went back, got my wheel on a stick, put a tone generator on the end of his drop wire, and I started walking from the side of his house, to the alley, and then down to a street. Once I was approaching 400 feet I came to a large pedestal on a corner of two streets. This seemed like the likely location for the trouble. I popped open the pedestal cover, and uncovered the worst rat's nest of wire I had seen to date in my career. Had to have been 250 pairs erupting in a tangled mess, insulation cracked and bare wire showing everywhere. Christ, no wonder this guy had trouble, probably everyone with service running through here had trouble. However, I'm only here to fix one pair, so I dive in with my toner wand looking for the chimes of my tone generator. Several patient minutes and several shocks later, ringer voltage hurts y'all, I finally located their pair. I cut off the damaged segment, put it in my pocket, and spliced the pair back together. Put everything back, walked back to the house, and showed the wire to the customer. "Here's the trouble, sir. It was intermittently making contact with other wires." He grinned and said, "I hope you'll understand if I say I'll see it when I believe it." I grinned back and said I wouldn't have it any other way. "Here's my number, call me if it happens again." Drove back to the box, hooked his wires back up, got my tone generator back, hooked his end back up, did my end of job tests, and got the hell out of there. I kept those wires as a trophy at my little desk at work. No one gave me any shit about it. I kept tabs on that account while I still worked there, looking at his line history every now and then, and he didn't have a single outage after that day. No phone calls. Victory was mine, we had a happy customer to boot, and I went to work to get access to the aforementioned cable maps that would make future jobs easier to work, should I find myself left hanging out to dry again. I work in IT at a company that is vaguely in the pharma industry. We're only a department of 4. I was originally hired to be temporary coverage for paternity leave, but they offered me a full-time position they were adding. At that point, I got a company-issued cell phone. Prior to this, I'd used my personal number for the few times I'd needed to make a call. Unfortunately, one of those people was an X200B technical trainer. She used to be a warehouse supervisor, but rumors they couldn't fire her, so when the other position came up, they welcomed it to get her out of their department. My first week, she called, instead of using our ticket system, to complain to my coworker, Lazy IT, that one of the printers didn't have a label tag on it with the name. Most of the other ones did, but occasionally they fall off. Also, she isn't sure it's working. Lazy IT sent me to go figure it out because he does nothing that requires him to leave his desk. I had to find it by pinging methodically. Our printer naming convention is pretty straightforward, so I knew it had to be one of a few numbers, and matching the IP listed on the printer's screen. We have a label maker but had run out of the print roll and were waiting on the next shipment of office supplies, so I called technical trainer to give her the name and let her know I'd make a label as soon as I could. She thanked me and that was that, or so I thought. Little did I know, she'd saved my phone number. Ugh. And X200B. Flash forward a few months, I was in the weird limbo of my contract was extended because the position doesn't open until the new year for budget reasons. Because I'm a temp, I'm not allowed to be on the employee directory even though I now have a company phone number. Rules are dumb, but I don't care enough to argue. It's tied to my ad account so people can look it up in Outlook. I had already booked a vacation that was after the end date on my contract. When my boss extended it, he gave me the time off without question, even though I don't get PTO. I set my out-of-office message on Outlook, Teams with my dates off, and said to contact Lazy IT or Senior IT. I left my laptop and company phone at home. I'm hourly, so no expectation of work on personal time. In Colorado, I hiked Quandary Peak with my sister. She runs marathons. I don't. Thought I was going to die. Anyway, unsurprisingly, There was poor cell service at 14,000 plus foot. When we got back to the cabin, I collapsed onto the floor and plugged my phone into charge. I saw the notification that I had a voicemail. I clicked on it. And #X200B. Hi, this is Technical Trainer, And #X200B. Deleted without listening to the rest of it. When I got back in town, I checked and had no emails or IMs from her. Checked her ticket history and there were no new entries. She didn't call lazy IT or senior IT, so it couldn't have been that important. I mentioned all this to my boss. His response: I would block her number if it were me. Things like this probably explain all his feuds with so many people in other departments.